Hi guys, I am Dani and welcome back here to Summer Skye Gardens. So welcome back if you have seen one of my videos before, and if you are new here, I own a flower farm in Splendora, Texas, which is zone 9B. It's kind of right northeast of Houston. We have a strong focus on agritourism here, but I also sell cut flowers both as bouquets, bouquet subscriptions, and wholesale to florists in my area. So the biggest focus on my channel is how to grow in a hotter climate. I share things about our flower farm, about flowers, about gardening, and growing anything and everything. But a lot of my videos, I try to focus on helping growers that are in warmer climates, that have longer hot summers, maybe more mild winters, because things can be a little tricky where we live. And I feel like there's just not enough people sharing content in our type of climate. So if you like what you see here, I hope you'll subscribe. And if you have questions, comment below, or give me ideas on maybe some videos you want to see me cover. I'm always happy to get some new ideas. So in today's video, I wanted to talk about tulips. Now, I know we're in September and maybe tulips aren't on the front of your mind because they are a spring flower. But if you're in a hot climate like me, you really need to start thinking about them right now. So I'm going to talk about how to be successful growing tulips and selling them and making money on them, but specifically how to do it in a hotter climate, because there are going to be some differences on growing in a hotter climate as opposed to people that live in a more temperate, moderate zone, or even up north in colder areas. So everybody knows tulips. They are a beautiful spring flower, and for a lot of people, they're the first flower that really start to bloom and kind of signal the coming of spring. And if you think of spring, if you think of spring holidays, especially like Easter, I'm sure tulips come to mind. So they're immensely popular, and if you can grow them, whether you want to grow them for just yourself at your home, or if you actually want to grow them to sell and be profitable, you can be very successful doing this. So timing wise, you're going to hear a lot of info from various sources on when to plant and how to grow them. And I am going to speak specifically to those of us in warmer climates. So the reason why you need to be starting to think about tulips right now is because if you are just buying bulbs that have not been chilled, so just you go to the store, you buy a bag of bulbs, I just got some from Costco, you need to be putting these in your cooler or refrigerator right now. For tulips to successfully grow, they need at least like 12 to 14 weeks of cold weather. And sometimes, where we live, it doesn't quite get cold enough for long enough if you just plant them directly in the ground. Believe me, I've tried. You may have intermittent success, but you're going to have way more success, especially continuously, if you chill them yourself or if you buy pre-chilled bulbs. So if you just order regular bulbs from places like Ball or Ownings, or you go to Costco or Home Depot and buy bags of tulip bulbs, you want to get them in a cooler, which is at least about 40 degrees Fahrenheit or 5 degrees Celsius. And that might be if you have a floral cooler or if you have a refrigerator, and you want to go ahead and put them in there right now as dry storage. And then you're going to let them sit in there for at least a good 12 to 14 weeks before you plant them out. Even longer is better. So putting them in right now gives you at least that chunk of time, or longer if you want to delay it. But it's kind of mimicking a colder climate, which is what tulips really like. They don't like our warmer, milder winters. Now, of course, you can buy pre-chilled bulbs, which is what I like to do as well. And I've been doing that the last several years because I didn't have a cooler until this year. So now I can buy regular bulbs and put them in a cooler. But before this, I've bought pre-chilled bulbs from my suppliers. My favorite is Leo Burby. They're a smaller company that's based in the US. And if you just tell them, you can pretty much buy anything of their supply, and tell them, hey, I want you guys to cool it for me. And they will do that at no extra charge. They throw them in the cooler in September, and then you can get them shipped at any time. So I typically get them shipped in November. And then I know, if the weather's colder and I'm ready to plant, I can, or if I want to put them in my cooler at that point, or my refrigerator, then I can keep them for just a little bit longer. Now, after they've had at least 12 to 14 weeks of cooling, or perhaps you've bought the pre-chilled bulbs and you've gotten them shipped to you, you're going to want to plant these in November or December. You'll hear people say like, oh, we're planting our tulips in January, February, March, and that's going to be more for people in a cooler climate. Maybe they have colder winters, they get actual freezing temps and snow. But I have found in our hotter climates, and once again, I'm in zone 9B, it warms up way too quickly to plant tulips that late. You're either not going to see growth or blooms, or they are going to shoot up and bloom really fast and be super short to the point where you can't even use them as cut flowers. So if you plant them in November or December, it's going to be about 6 to 8 weeks before you see blooms that you can cut. So then you're getting blooms in January and February. And typically by the end of February, beginning of March, it has warmed up too much in order to be successful after that. So there is a good point to this. A lot of people struggle with getting flowers for Valentine's Day. We can get tulips for Valentine's Day if you can time it right. And that can be a very, very successful sales outlet for you, especially if you do like the traditional, pink and red and white colors for Valentine's. If you can hit it where you can, get them to bloom before or pretty close to Valentine's, I assure you, you'll probably sell out of every single stem. Okay, so how do you want to grow tulips? There's a lot of different ways, and I think that just depends on your area and, how much room do you have, how much time do you have, what labor do you want to put into it. A lot of people plant them in the ground, and that's totally fine, and there's a lot of different ways you can plant them in the ground. Some people use a drill auger and drop them down. Some people dig a big trench and drop them down and fold it over. Some people build temporary raised beds. But just know, if you plant them outside in the ground, you cannot plant them in that same area again for at least 7 years. And the reason is because tulips are really prone to a fungal disease called tulip fire, which is botrytis. Now, this fungus will infect the leaves, infect the blooms, infect the bulbs, and it can linger in the soil for years. So you really have to be careful with your crop rotation year after year. For some people, this isn't a big deal. They have enough space, or maybe they're just moving rows, and that's totally fine. But if you have a smaller area and you don't want to worry about doing this, my suggestion would be to grow them in crates, and that's what I do. So if you're growing in crates, every year you're getting new fresh soil, so you don't have to worry about if a fungal disease is lingering because you're not reusing the soil. So in using crates, I'll show you. Here is a typical bulb crate. Sorry, I'm not far enough back to get it all in the screen. You can get these a lot of different places. If you visit like your local wholesalers, nurseries, plant stores, they may get these in the fall when they're getting bulb shipments, and you can see if you can, get them from them for free, or maybe just buy them for a few dollars. If you're buying large quantities of bulbs, then they may get shipped in crates, or places like Leo Burby, you can say, hey, can you ship my, shipment in a crate for an extra few bucks, and they'll do that. So I've definitely accumulated a handful of these from doing all those things. I also went this past year, because I was growing a lot more and needed a lot more crates. I went to my local Michoacana, which is like a Mexican meat vegetable market, and they have similar crates. They're not quite as sturdy and they're smaller, but they completely serve the purpose, and they sold me a bunch for $1 a piece. So, maybe look at some of your local produce stores and just see, hey, Do you guys have any like crates that you're looking to get rid of that I can use, that I can buy off of you in order to grow your tulips? So I'll talk about growing in crates because that's how I do it. So I get my crate, I get Pro Mix, which is a soil that you can buy a lot of different places. I get it at Walmart. It was recommended by Dave Dowling and Lisa Mason Ziegler. So you know that's a good thing. And I fill my crates with soil. I usually do like a couple of inches on the bottom first, and then I put my tulips in, and then I cover with about another 6 inches of soil. Now, when you're planting tulips, it used to be that you wanted to make sure the pointy end was up. There are some people now that are just kind of dumping them in and spreading them out and having success with that. So I might try that this year with some of mine and just see how they do. And then others I may just go put them in because it really is like pretty fast. And you want to plant them really close together. So think of like eggs in a carton. So they're really close, but they're not touching. And in one of these bulb crates, you can get about 100 bulbs in there. So once I've got my bulbs in there and I've got my soil, I water them in really deeply. I leave them outside and I leave them alone. I don't do anything to them until I start to see growth. If it is going to freeze pretty hard, I may cover them, but sometimes tulips, especially if they're not growing yet, will be okay with a light freeze, like in the upper 20s, which is really only about how cold it gets here. So I think last year I only covered my flowers once, and that was mid-January, and I already had growth and a couple of blooms coming up at that time, and I didn't want to risk losing them, so I did cover them with frost cloth. But otherwise, I just leave them alone, and typically they don't need water until they start peeking out above the soil. And I forgot to mention, but throughout this video, I'm going to be showing you some pictures and some video of my tulips so that you can kind of see what I'm talking about. But once they start peeking up above the soil, that's when you really want to stay on top of the watering. They are really thirsty, and especially if you're growing in a crate, they're going to dry out really quickly. So you may be watering every couple of days or even every day just to like keep them constantly moist, but you don't want them drowning. And in the crates, they are going to drain and dry out pretty quickly. If they're in the ground, just make sure your soil is fast draining and it's loose and healthy, so that you don't risk your tulips rotting. But they need more water than you may think. As for other parts of growing, you don't need to fertilize them. You don't need to stake or corral them. So as far as labor goes, they are like pretty easy to grow. I mean, the labor of putting them in the crates is really fast, leaving them alone. The only, additional labor I may do is if it starts warming up too much, I will move them to a shady area to kind of keep it cooler. So, that's the good thing as well about crates, is that I can move them if I need to. And I did that last year, and that really helped to prevent them from kind of like shooting up and blooming prematurely. Now, once you see bulbs starting to come up, how do you know when they're ready to cut? So if it is a single variety tulip, you're going to want to cut it or pull it out when it is still very tight but colored. This is going to give you the longest vase life. It's going to give you the best storage if you're wanting to store it in a cooler. If it's like a double fuller peony, parrot variety, then you want to catch it when it's just starting to crack open. So like not fully tight, but just a little bit cracked, and that'll make sure all the petals fully open up. You can either cut at the base, or you can pull the whole bulb out. If you are using these for cutting flowers, you're not going to want to save the bulbs. Some people may tell you that you could get another year out of them, but most professional flower growers, they do not recommend saving the bulbs because it's just not reliable that they will grow again and that they will be of the best quality. So I like to just pull the whole flower out. And the good thing with growing in crates is that you can pull the whole flower out with the bulb attached, Super easy because it's in a crate, it's in this loose, soil, and that's how I like to store them as well. So whether you cut them or pull the bulb out, that's the stage that you want to get them at. Now, storage, let's say you're not going to be using your tulips right away and you need to store them. They do store exceptionally well. So either in a cooler or a refrigerator at about 40 degrees, you can get at least 2 to 3 weeks out of them. There's a couple of ways you can store them. Most people either store them, if you cut them, you put them in water, or if you leave the bulb on, you store them dry. I prefer to leave the bulb on and store them dry. And then, when I'm ready to use them, whether it's to sell to a florist, to put in a mixed bouquet, then I will cut the bulb off and, clean it. But it's just so easy to just pull them all out. You can either stand them upright in a bucket or lay them in a crate and just put them in the cooler and leave them alone until you're ready to use them. Now, one thing about tulips with storing, they will start to grow toward the light. So if they are laying flat, as long as they're all kind of just laying flat on top of each other, that should be fine. If they are staying upright in a bucket, they may start to get crooked neck as they kind of reach towards the light. So you can either get a super tall bucket that helps keep them straight, or you can just wrap them in paper to help keep them upright. And on that note, once you're ready to use them and you cut them, just know that they will keep growing a little bit after you cut them. And I'll show you guys some pictures right here. I've had varieties that when I cut it to when it was like fully bloomed open, they had grown 1 to 2 or more inches in the vase or in the arrangement. So think about that, like when you're using them and you're cutting them, especially in a mixed arrangement, you may want to cut them and place them in a little shorter because they are going to grow a little more as they start to open up. It's pretty cool. So now that we've talked about growing and harvesting, let's talk about just some of the different varieties. So pretty much, most tulip growers are going to classify varieties as either like singles, which is your typical just single petaled Easter egg common tulips, or your fancy tulips that are frilly, fluffy, and doubled. So when I'm talking about cost and sales, I'm just going to say they're either singles or they're fancy. And in the fancy, you have ones that are like the parrots where they're ombre colored. You have like the doubles or the peonies where they have, more than one set of petals. You have the fringed ones that have like fringed edges on the petals. You have the ones that look like a lily where the petals are more pointed and they kind of flop outwards. And there's a lot of other different varieties. And so, thinking about which ones you want to grow, I would think about your market and who you're selling to. If you're just selling like mixed bouquets at the farmer's market or a roadside stand, then I think like the singles can be a great way to go to make a profit because they're a lot cheaper. If you're going to be selling to florists or wholesalers, or maybe you're doing event work, then you may want to gravitate more towards those specialty varieties because, wholesalers and florists, they can't get those specialty varieties, at the wholesaler because the tulips are getting shipped in from another country and they are not usually growing those specialty types of tulips. So that's a good way that you could stand out in your local market, or even just selling directly to customers, is by growing some of those more fancy tulip varieties that people don't see in the stores, that they can't just go buy at Costco and plant in their yard. They want to see something different. So lastly, I want to talk about cost and sales, because if you're watching this, you may be a flower farmer, you may be wanting to get into selling tulips. And so making sure that you keep your costs down and that you're selling at the right price point is going to make or break, whether you are profitable or not. So the first thing you want to look at is cost of the bulb. Now, there's so many different places that you can get bulbs, and typically the more you buy, the cheaper they will be. So that's something to keep in mind. These singles are going to be cheaper than the, fancier varieties, and different suppliers are going to have different price points. My best advice would be if you could get them for about 50 cents a bulb or cheaper, that's going to be a really great price point no matter what kind of tulip you're growing. Now, like with Leo Burby, for instance, last year, I paid 58 cents a bulb. That included shipping, and that included the cost of adding in a few crates. So I felt like that was a good deal, and having them be pre-chilled for me. And then when I factored in like my labor in planting them and the cost of the crate and the soil, it was about 67 cents per flower to plant it and get it up and growing. So if you think about every flower cost me 67 cents, what do I need to sell it at to make a profit? I need to get at least probably double that, if not more, in order to make a profit. So wholesale, I like to think about wholesale costs because then you can just multiply it by 2 or 3 to get your retail costs. So wholesale cost, I was selling single tulips for about $1 a piece. And then specialty varieties was selling at least $1.50 to $2 a piece wholesale. So I was getting at least twice, my cost, if not a little bit extra. And I lean very heavily on growing the fancier varieties because I sell a lot to florists and other, event people. And also just because selling them in my local neighborhoods, people love them and wanted more and more and more. So it's kind of worth it for me to spend, the money on the fancier varieties in order to, be able to sell more of them and make more of a profit. Okay, that is kind of like a general overview of how you can be successful not only growing tulips in a hotter climate, but being able to sell them and turn a profit. I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. Make sure you subscribe to my channel, and I will see you guys in my next video.